wondering that I'm going to go ahead and answer this morning, and then a few that are going to come up later today. Here. Okay, so the first question card I wanted to go over was one actually from last week about hot tubs. And the question is, if the heat of the hot tub lowers sperm quality, is this why it's recommended to take cold showers? So first of all, a hot shower will not really do that much to inhibit sperm quality. A super hot bath kind of would. And then also there are other reasons why it's kind of recommended to take cold showers, like it can wake you up. It can make you a little bit more mentally alert, but hot versus cold shower for fertility of sperm purposes is not going to have that big of an effect. But if you're a bath guy, hot bath would have a lot more effect than a hot shower because your testes are literally sitting down in that temperature. But I wouldn't use that as a birth control method. Next question. Is it true that how you eat will affect women's cycle? And if so, what foods help? I really like this question also. There is not a lot of really good, rigorous evidence that what you eat affects your cycle at this point. But generally, eating healthily is good for you in all different body systems. And if you're having trouble regulating your cycle, eating healthily will help that, but there's no magic food so far. Sorry. Maybe in the next 10 years we'll know more about that. Next question. Is ectopic pregnancy the main reason for miscarriages? Let me show that relevant slide. Ectopic pregnancy will end up resulting in a miscarriage or a termination if the parents decide that, but it is not the main cause of miscarriage. About 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. About 1 in 50 pregnancies would end because of ectopic pregnancy. So it is a cause, but it is not the main cause. And there is not a main cause of miscarriages. I'm going to write down some of the things that can cause miscarriages, but they're all kind of equal in their effects. Or there's not like the main one. So some of the causes of miscarriages, which is basically pregnancy loss, it would include ectopic pregnancy. It can include some genetic causes, either from the mom or the dad, or in rare cases, both of their genes together are causing the problem. But that's not the main cause, it is a cause. The biggest reason, like if you classified a miscarriage, like why did this happen? The biggest reason is going to be, we don't know why this happened, and it's unknown. For women that keep on and on having miscarriages, then they're more likely to get testing and investigate why is this happening. There are some contributions from chemicals, drugs, environmental toxins, certain medicines, but not many. And I'll get back to this when we get to the pregnancy part of lecture. But these kind of things are not as miscarriage causing as you might think. So sometimes when women miscarry, they of course they might be grieving and asking, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? And think, maybe I shouldn't have cleaned my tub with bleach. It's usually not that. It's usually unknown. It's sometimes genetic causes, it's sometimes ectopic pregnancy, but there's not one main thing that we can say, oh, that's why you had a miscarriage. Love that question. And then one other question that relates to last time, and this is still a good picture to show it, is asking about if somebody had, like, say, ovarian cancer and they lost an ovary, is it possible to still conceive with the other ovary? And it absolutely is. It would just maybe take longer. So just because you lose one, it doesn't mean that the other one is also not going to work. You can still get pregnant, but it might take longer. And whoever had that question, I would just encourage you not to wait till you're, 35 or something. If actually, for anybody, if it's for women, this is unfair. If it's very important to you to have kids, don't put it off too long. Like, the older you get, just the harder it is. So that is my general advice to people. And then if I have not answered your question yet, that's coming up today. So I've still got two questions that I haven't gotten to yet, and I should be getting to those answers today. So when we had stopped last time, we were on this picture and had just started talking about this concept that the age of the embryo, we date the age of the embryo from fertilization. And day one of the embryo age is the date that the sperm fertilized the egg and we have a zygote here. And these numbers of days on the embryos down here, they're measuring how old is that embryo from day one of zygote. But when we talk about how many weeks pregnant someone is, we measure that in the weeks since last menstrual period, because that's easier to somewhat reliably say, yeah, I know I've got my period. This is the last time I basically did. And that's how we count pregnancy. So this age plus 2 more weeks equals what we call weeks pregnant. So if someone is 20 weeks pregnant, how old is the embryo, let's say? 18? Yeah, like 18, yeah. The embryo would be 18 weeks if the mom is 20 weeks pregnant. So there's a kind of like a 2-week gap there. The reason that matters a lot is when we talk about early pregnancy. LaDonna, could you turn off just the light closest to me? Now we're going to look at some of these pictures in a little more detail. Okay. So one reason that this comes up, and people are talking about this a lot right now, like with when should we allow abortion, and when should the right time, if there's a right time. And you may see things like this. I got this off of a social media several years ago. And there's truths on this and there's untruths on this. So it's kind of a mixture. So it's saying in the baby in the womb at 3 weeks, and it's saying that the foundations for the organ systems are starting to develop, and this is correct. Like, even when the we would call it an embryo medically is 3 weeks old, there are cells in its body that are going to become the different organ systems. So the words are true, but this is not a 3-week embryo. Whoops. Okay. This is not a 3-week embryo. This is a 3-week embryo. So I want to kind of compare these pictures to the Carnegie stages. So here's 3-week embryo. which is about here. So like somewhere 3 weeks of embryonic development, about 21 days. This is the embryo being 3 weeks old. What week of pregnancy would that be? It'd be 5, yeah. So at this stage, the mom is 5 weeks pregnant. The embryo is 3 weeks old. Like neither of those are correct with this part over here. So now we're going to look at him or her. And that is somewhere like here or here, maybe a few days in between, because they are developing very fast at this point. So we'll go somewhere in the middle. So we're going to say that stage in this picture, this is about 49 days of embryonic development. This is more like a 9th week of pregnancy. And this is, I'm not going to like ask you guys like match the embryo to the stage, but just like seeing the stages and thinking about what is the difference between this is 9 weeks pregnant, this is 5 weeks pregnant, and that's a big difference in what we're talking about. So that's really important to note. I want to go back to this, and there was a question, really good question, that's also so much in the news right now. How many weeks before a fetus gets a heart? And so that question of heart versus heartbeat versus electrical signal is a really big deal. And now that you all have had AMP2 and you've learned about heart conduction system, you all are well equipped to know some of these differences. So I want to go back to our heart conduction picture. This has been a while. Go. Keep doing this wrong. There we go. And I'm going to the one that has the conduction system with the SA node. That's what I'm looking for. This one. Okay. So remember on this picture, we have these cells in the heart that generate electrical signals on their own. So the pulsing of the tissues is going to come first. So the embryo is going to have electrical tissues in its body that start creating electrical pulses really early. So that, where's my marker? The electrical signal, or the pulses that can be detected like during an ultrasound. That can be detected at 5 or 6 weeks of pregnancy. The pulsing. At that time, there are no chambers yet. There are some cells that are going to become a heart, but there are not chambers. There are cells pulsing, and you can detect the pulsing outside the body, and it's really fast. Not as slow as a grown-up heartbeat. So heartbeat, when the heartbeat is, it depends on what you define as a heartbeat. Like, does a heartbeat have to have all the chambers, or does it have to have is it just the pulsing of the electrical cells? The heart being developed as a recognizable heart that we can see, yeah, it's got 4 chambers in it. That's going to be sometime in second trimester would be something that we recognize as a heart. And I haven't gotten to the weeks of the trimester and stuff, but that question of like, when is there a heartbeat? It depends on how you define heartbeat. There is electrical pulsing of cells that are going to become a heart at 5 or 6 weeks of pregnancy. So if you've heard about the Texas super strict abortion law, like no abortions after 6 weeks because the fetus has a heartbeat, it's got something. It's got electrical pulsing. Is it a heartbeat? It depends. It depends on how you define it. But six weeks pregnant would be 4 weeks of embryonic development, which is about like this. So when people are debating about 6-week embryo, this is its stage, and it would be about the length of your pinky nail if you're a woman. And it is something different than the mom, and it has electrical activity, and it has cells that are going to become all the organ systems. It's not like whether you call it a baby or not. So the words we use matter to the discussion, and the knowledge of what these beings have and don't matters to that discussion. Heavy stuff. The next thing that I want to kind of write down in our timeline. Okay, so to me, like if I had to say, if you say, Dr. Ong, when do you think that the embryo is basically a person? To me, it's going to be somewhere around here. So, which is week 7 of embryonic development, week 9 of pregnancy. Like that to me is when I'm not going to like test you on this. This is what I think. Like, so if I say, when does an embryo start to bear the image of a person and start to become what we might think of as a person, it's going to be somewhere in here to me, which is around week 9 of pregnancy, somewhere in here. But that's, I don't know, like courts so far don't define person this early. Like there's probably going to be a big Supreme Court case in the next year that's going to look at that question again. Is this a person? If so, what age? But knowing this stuff, the Supreme Court justices and lawyers, they look at this stuff as well. So it's a very important topic in many ways. So related to that, there are several timeline or definitions of what do we call medically this being at this stage. And zygote, that's the single fertilized cell. That one we already talked about. This one we also talked about, how do we define pregnant? So pregnant is defined by implantation and then the hormones that are detectable after it. We can't detect the fertilized zygote until it implants and then the mom starts making hormones. So that's how we define pregnancy. Something important to note about pregnancy is that right now, today, the very earliest that pregnancy can be detected is about 5 days. Well, I've got this up here. You can detect it definitely way after this, but about 5 days after fertilization. That's about the soonest that you can get it. So the earliest possible, right now in 2021, that you can know that a person is pregnant, they're already going to be 3 weeks pregnant. And that is with the most sensitive pregnancy test that you can buy. Like a really expensive one, or like a hospital-based, super good, super sensitive hormone detector. The person's going to be 3 weeks pregnant. With your average, like normal costing pregnancy test, it's going to be 4 weeks, probably. And this I'm not going to write down, but if women don't have regular cycles and they don't keep track of their last menstrual period and you get busy, like you could totally be 6 weeks pregnant and not realize it. Like that is very common. People who know they're pregnant at 6 weeks have to have really regular cycles, and they have to, you know, be interested in getting a test pretty quickly. So that 6 week cutoff for abortion, like it really assumes that everyone's got regular cycles, everyone's pregnancy testing like super early. That matters to, you know, legal. That matters to abortion rules very much also. We count weeks of pregnancy from the last menstrual period. So if you missed how to spell that, we already talked about that, but this is how you spell it, last menstrual period. And here's a new one. This is a new definition of what do we call this new being. When it's one cell, it's a zygote. When it's at the implantation stage, it's blastocyst. When it's an embryo, or sorry, up until about, let's say, actually I want you to cross this out. It's 11 weeks of pregnancy. So 11 weeks of pregnancy, or about 9 weeks that the embryo has existed. It's referred to as embryo. And then after that, it's referred to as fetus. So also cross this out. Have these like a week too early. Fetus is from 12 weeks of pregnancy onward, let's say. So after 12 weeks, it is called fetus. But what you say about that, what you call it, depends on sometimes what the person feels. So here's an example. You have a friend that is very excited to be pregnant, and then they miscarry pretty early. So during the first 11 weeks, they miscarry, and you don't go up to them and you say, "I'm so sorry about your embryo." Like, no one does that. You say, "I'm so sorry that you lost the baby." The words are kind of going to be situational, but these are the medical definition words. So let's also want to look just back one more time at this. 11 weeks pregnant is 9 weeks of embryonic development, which is 9 times 7, 63. Like basically, embryo is all of this. Fetus is after this. So to me, it doesn't line up real neatly that personhood starts with the fetus and the embryo is not, because to me, person is probably toward the end of this. But this picture pretty much cuts off at the end of the embryonic stage. And then you would have fetus after that. So I had it right there, repeated. So now now we're going to, actually, there's a couple of other terms we need to get, which is about trimesters. And maybe you've heard of this in regards to pregnancy. Trimesters. How many weeks is a full-term, full-length pregnancy? What'd you say? 40. Good. Can't. Full length. Or what we call full-term pregnancy is 40 weeks. Which would be the embryo developing for 38 weeks, but 40 weeks. And weeks 1 through 13 are called first trimester. Weeks 14 through 27 we call the second trimester. And then weeks 28 through 40 are third trimester. And they're kind of, I think you learn more about this in lifespan human development, but I'm going to put like what are the major events. So in this one, we've got implantation, formation of the placenta, which is this large, important structure between the mother and the embryo fetus being. And what I'm going to call body patterning. So all of the different organ systems and major like framework for the body are going to be laid down during that first trimester. Second trimester, the organ systems mostly are going to get their final structure. And it's going to be fetus by this time. There's lots of growth of the fetus, so it gets dramatically bigger. And this time is when the mother will start to show, maybe. Like it might be visible, you know, to somebody that doesn't know them that they might be pregnant. Some women don't, like, if you don't know them well, you can't even, like, they just eating all pregnant. It's different for different people. And then the third trimester, the fetus is going to put on weight. This is the fetus. The mom's going to put on weight all through this, pretty much. Fetus is going to put on weight and kind of go through final maturation during that time. The vast majority of miscarriages happen in the first trimester. Not so many in the second trimester. Fortunately, not so many in the third trimester. Same is true with abortions as well. The vast majority in the first trimester, many fewer in the second, and very few in the third.
Would a miscarriage in the third trimester be a stillborn?
I like that question. I mean, I don't like what's behind that question, but would a miscarriage in the third trimester be a stillborn or a stillbirth? I'm actually going to Google what is the definition of a stillbirth because I don't know what week defines it.
That's why like miscarriages like usually sounds fully developed, so I don't know what it'd be called.
I mean, we do use the word stillbirth versus miscarriage. Okay, that definition is if it's before the 20th week, a miscarriage, a stillbirth after the 20th.
Okay, so it would be third trimester.
Yeah. Well, it could be late second. And that's an interesting, that's a weird dividing line, but not one that I knew what it was. Yeah. So stillbirth after the 20th week, miscarriage before the 20th week. This is another word that I want you to know, which is viability. Viability. So what this means, this is actually not the definition of it. Viability is when can a fetus, this is the age when the fetus can survive, like with a good chance, outside the uterus. This slide is from, I made these about 10 years ago, and it's actually now 22 weeks. When I was your age, it was about 26 weeks. This is something that medical technology gets better at being able to save babies that are born too soon. So cross this out, it's 22 weeks this year. And I just saw last night that there's a baby in, Google this also. He lives in Alabama. This is him. Just show his picture right there. He is the world record holder for the earliest baby to be born and still survive, and this is him now. And I was just reading this last night, and I forgot his name. Curtis. Curtis is his. Stop. Not now. We don't look at Curtis. There he is. There will be some 21-week births that can survive, but it's just borderline or not. But here's Curtis, and he's doing pretty well. He still needs some oxygen for a while, but if you want to go and read the article about him, he's going to be fine. It's a great story. 21 weeks and 1 day, I think it was. So 19 weeks and 1 day of Curtis fetal development in the womb. So if a fetus is born and becomes now a baby at 22 weeks, if you are in a location with good medical center and good medical care, they will rush the baby to that place and they will start putting them in the neonatal intensive care. If you live in the middle of Montana, your baby's not going to make it, and that's just, you're too far away. And that's really harsh. That's unfair. But the closer you are to a major city, the easier it is to keep those babies alive. In this location, they will take you to Johnson City and then pretty quickly to Nashville. And then if you're on the Virginia side, it would probably be Richmond. At 22 weeks, about half those babies will live if they've got quick, intensive medical care. And of the ones that live, about half of them will have some kind of long-term problem just because they didn't have enough time to finish developing. So if we think about 22 weeks, it's about 2/3 of the way through here, and they didn't get finished doing their major development yet. So that's the challenge. 22 weeks right now is the cutoff for big hospitals to say, yeah, we're going to try. If it's before that, they're going to call the chaplain. Some of you may want to investigate being a chaplain. Let me just throw that out there. You don't have to be a pastor to be a chaplain. I had a student start going through the process, and you do have to like take Greek and stuff. She quit maybe too soon, but thought about it. Some countries will line up their legal limit for abortion with fetal viability. And to me, I don't necessarily agree with that personally, but it makes sense that if the baby can survive outside the mom, that's kind of in a way, makes sense. Like, well, we could keep it alive without the mom. But also, before this, the baby cannot live without the mom. So viability is always a big, like, when is viability? That's always a big legal consideration in abortion timing, let's say. Can't live without you as the mom. Is it a person yet? Those are then the two big questions. This slide I'm mostly going to skip over. I don't have much to say about this. You can take it out. I do want to get to, so babies that are born too soon tend to have some of their body systems working pretty well, but others aren't quite finished. So that's what this picture is, that's titled Saving Little Lives. It's kind of a list of what kind of help will premature babies need. So they will tend to have eye problems, and they usually need the tiny, tiny glasses once they get out of the hospital. Those have come a long way. And when I was a kid, there were no cute tiny glasses. They were just ugly. Now they're cute. So they will need eye assistance later on. They, depending on how early they are, their digestive system is not ready for actual absorption. So sometimes they will need IV nutrition until their digestive system gets a little more mature. They will not be able to breathe well because they don't have that inside surfactant chemical in their alveoli. So they will have to be on the tiny, tiny respirator, and they'll have the tiny, tiny mask on their face in the NICU. They may have some brain bleeds. That's one of the more concerning things that you hope doesn't happen. But there have been plenty of babies born and had brain bleeds, and they end up okay. And just so you know, if you have a friend or yourself that later in life that they have a very premature infant, they are going to look really bad. And their appearance, do I still have the Curtis? This is not the article I read last night. I saw that picture. No, this one then, they look like a baby bird. You know how a baby bird looks just red and skinny and its eyes are all bulging out? Preemies look that way. Don't let it faze you. That as they gain weight and they put on fat, they're going to turn out to look fine. But if you ever go visit your friends or your own baby in the hospital, don't be fazed by how it looks if it's very premature. They're going to be beautiful. They will. I remember the first time that I had a friend, I was like, oh my gosh, that baby. She's fine. She's perfect now. Another thing that premature babies tend to have happen is that their heart is not quite finished developing. So I want to give a little bit of info about how fetal heart and circulatory system develops. And a lot of this info is on this picture, but this has a little more depth than I'm going to go into. This basically is the state of the fetal heart at a full-term birth. And think about, what's going on while this fetus has been in the womb. The mom breathes for it. The mom eats for it. She's been doing a lot of the work physiologically. But as soon as the baby is born, it's going to have to start breathing air, which is just a shock. Like it never had to before. All of its oxygen and CO2 and its nutrients and its wastes. We should write this down. Oxygen, CO2, nutrients, wastes of the fetus or let's say they're processed through the placenta and the mother is doing the breathing, eating, and the waste excretion. This is another reason why pregnant women have to pee so much, is that they are also processing fetal wastes coming into their blood. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. So until birth, the baby doesn't need to urinate. It doesn't need to breathe. So because the mom is supplying oxygen, the heart before birth does not need to send blood to the lungs because there's no point. Like their lungs aren't going to do anything yet. So fetal circulation bypasses, let's say fetal blood circulation bypasses the lungs. They don't have any air in their lungs, so there's no need for the blood to even go there. So fetal blood moves from right atrium directly to the left atrium through this structure called foramen ovale. Foramen, which means hole. Ovale means oval. It is a hole between the atria. So all of us during fetal development, we start out having a hole in our heart. And sometimes you'll hear, oh, that baby was born with a hole in their heart. All of us had it. It's just supposed to close soon after birth. It's supposed to close up. So then the blood can start taking a more normal path and then go to the lungs, pick up oxygen, then come back. So closure of that foramen ovale is supposed to happen very soon around birth. And then the other thing that happens is that all of these blood vessels that are going into and out of the placenta, that's what the umbilical cord is. So maybe you've seen on TV or experienced it. When the baby is born, it comes through the birth canal and it's connected by this cord still to the placenta, which is still inside the uterus. And that has to be cut. And it's kind of like, Dad, you want to cut the cord? Yes, I'll cut it. Some of them don't. You don't have to. But like, that's kind of a big deal for the baby's physiology. It's like, you are cut off. You're going to have to breathe. You're going to have to pee now. You're going to have to eat food. The connection is going to be gone. And then all of the internal blood vessels that made that connection, there's one that went to the liver, and there's one that kind of tied into the inferior vena cava and so on. Those are going to kind of dissolve and become ligaments. Not dissolve, they're going to turn into ligaments. So those changes have to happen really soon after birth. If they don't, we have the ability now to do surgery and to correct those heart defects that some babies may be born with. This information, this is that same information, but you can look at that later if you're interested. So these, before we go on to contraception, these kind of questions are some of the big bioethics questions and reproductive rights and abortion rights questions of our day. And nobody has the answers to these. There are many people that have very strongly held beliefs about when is the embryo a person, when does it have rights? Should a mom, how much of a mom's health should she sacrifice for her fetus? And then this one, we will be talking about some in this class. So depending on your answer to this question, kind of relates to what kind of contraception would be good for you. So I do want to go ahead and start on contraception today. And before we get to that, there's a question card I didn't get to yet, but this is the questions on it. Can birth control hurt you in the long term? Can it make you infertile? When should a person come off birth control? So can it hurt you long term? Can it make you infertile? When should a person come off of birth control? I'm going to say something about the middle one. Can it make you infertile? It can, but it's really it's very low chance. Very low chance. There's many other things in life that are more likely to make you infertile than birth control. Can it hurt you long term? I'm going to come back to that later, because there's some that have a low chance, some that have not much chance. And when a person should come off birth control, like that is very hard. That one, it depends on the person and depends on what your situation is. So I'm going to keep this one and address certain parts of that when we get to certain contraceptive types. So now that we know what does it take to conceive, to achieve pregnancy, the flip side of that coin is how do you prevent pregnancy? And at different times in your life, you're going to want one more than the other, maybe. Knowing the knowledge is the same knowledge for both. Okay. So when I started teaching A&Ps, I lived in Arkansas, and this family lives in Arkansas. They're called the Duggars. And a lot of things have happened to the Duggars since those days, but they're famous because they have so many kids. And they used to have a show called 19 Kids and Counting. And they have a lot of kids. So think about your great-grandparents. How many of you had a great-grandparent that had more than 7 brothers and sisters? Like it used to be like that this would be kind of like, oh, 19, used to be that this was not that out there, let's say. My grandma had 13 brothers and sisters, and my grandpa was the only one. So opposite. Before contraception, you could kind of assume that you would have like 5 or 6 kids in your lifetime, would be the average. Contraception changes a lot of things. And just before we go on, I really value contraception because if I did not have contraception, I would not be able to do my career. So Han and I have been very reproductively blessed. Like we could decide, let's have another child next year. Let's have one in the summer, in between when I'm teaching. And those kind of decisions didn't used to exist for women. So I don't think we would be like the Duggars, but if I didn't have contraception, it would be really hard for me to work and do anything but take care of kids. We would have been something like that. Maybe I would have had a girl. Contraception, you don't have to use contraception, but it's changed the world for women very much. So to prevent conception is always going to block some step in the process. Like maybe we're going to block the sperm. Maybe we're going to block the release of the egg in some way. So there are four major ways to do this, four major categories to block conception. And we'll end today by kind of going over the ways and generally how do they work. So there are ways that are considered behavioral. Like you're not using any materials for this. You're just making some decisions about when and when not to have sex to help avoid conception. So those don't need really so much like objects or materials or purchases to do. There are methods that are barrier, and all of those have in common that they're going to prevent the sperm from reaching the egg. And then we have hormonal. And so far, all the hormonal methods are altering the female hormone levels. And all of these are preventing ovulation, is the main way that they work. So adjust hormone levels, prevent ovulation. And then we have surgical methods. The surgical methods are not very reversible. And they would technically act like a barrier, like the sperm aren't going to meet the eggs, but you accomplish that through a surgery that's basically permanent. This set are reversible. Surgical methods, not so reversible. And as we go through the different methods, we'll just start those on Monday. You want to know what style is it? How likely is it to fail? Generally, how does it work? And what are some pros and cons? And I want to just zoom ahead to this chart right here and do one relevant fact right here at the end. This, you can look at the details of this later. It's a chart of failure rates, but the average couple having sex at like what's considered a normal rate, which I'm not going to go there. I don't know what that is, but or let me say 85%. 85% of average couples would achieve pregnancy in a year without contraception. So up there where it says birth control methods, none. If you don't use any method, 85% of people in a year would achieve a pregnancy. The ones who are not, they are considered medically to be infertile, which is about 1 in 6 couples. Like you might consider them lucky, or you might consider them infertile. It depends on what their goals are at that time. So we start with that. That's the failure rate, the success rate. Depends on your outcome. Start with that. So we'll be looking at this chart a lot on Monday as we go through the different methods. So a lot of you put like all the question cards on that corner as you left. That's really helpful if you're going that way. Now I just sorted them into yes, there is a question, or no, but keep asking. I salute you for asking a question during class. That's a really good question. I never looked up the definition.
I've always been like very curious about pregnancies.
What'd you say?
I've been very curious about pregnancies, and I've heard about that. I was like, wait, do you like miscarriages are just like early enough, like it just kind of like comes out of your body, but if it's further on the stage, it just
Yeah.
disappear.
Yeah, one of my stop recording before